Alright. Hello everybody, and welcome to my Tier 2 review of Britain. Going on down the tech tree, we're now starting to see a lot more iconic aircraft for most nations in this game, and I guess you could say more developed planes from Tier 1. But let's just start off, since I was going to talk about this when I released my German video, that these guys would be down the line here just because the Russians here have a British plane in the premium tech tree that I was going to talk about, and they also have a British bomber here, captured British bomber in the German tech tree. So let's just talk about the British here. The first plane you get after the Hurricane Mark 1L is the Hurricane Mark 2B Tropical. Now, what makes it the tropical variant is this little chin filter underneath here. Basically, all it does is prevent stuff like sand and leaves and whatnot, kind of prevent basically stuff you would get in more harsh environments from getting up into the engine. It does kind of deplete the engine's power a little bit. As you notice, this is kind of a slower hurricane. Hurricanes aren't really known for their speed much anyway, but it's just something to be aware of that you do have this here, but it really doesn't affect you all that much just because the hurricanes aren't really that fast in the first place. But in terms of hurricanes, this is probably, I'd say, top 3 of the best hurricanes in the game. There is the Hurricane Mark 2B that the Russians have that have 20mm cannons and then 50 cals, and then there's the Hurricane Mark 1C down here that I'll talk about, which has 4 20mm Hispanos. But this isn't a bad hurricane in and of itself, just because in terms of just machine guns, it is the most heavily armed hurricane. While normal hurricanes will have 8 machine guns here, this has 12. It has an additional 2 on each wing, and they are kind of spread out a little bit here. It's kind of weird that they're not grouped with the others, but it is what it is, so you might have to kind of mess with the gun convergence a little bit just to kind of figure out where you want your bullets to hit. 16.3 second turn time. Again, that's only a rudder turn, but hurricanes are always kind of known for their maneuverability. They're not too fast, and they're not really that slow either, but in terms of the maneuverability, the hurricanes are good. And with the fact that you have 12 of these little machine guns here, granted they are the second smallest machine guns in the game, being at 7.7. Or I think they're bigger than the 7.62s, but they don't fire as fast, but whatever. They're small guns, but there's a lot of them. So most things at Battle Rating 2.3, depending on what belts you have, I usually just either go with the stealth or the tracer belt, mostly just because the stealth belt just has armor-piercing incendiary and incendiary bullets, while the tracer belt just has incendiary tracers and then just armor-piercing incendiary. So they're basically the same thing. I usually just rock with the stealth just because I don't really like people knowing I'm shooting at them. It can be a decent ground attacker too. It has the capability of carrying 2 250-pound bombs or 6 RP-3 rockets. Save the bombs and the rockets for the more harder targets, because these little machine guns here are going to do jack squat against bunkers. But this is kind of a versatile aircraft. I would say if you want to do some ground pounding, you can. And when you do eventually get attacked by somebody who sees you as a ground attacker and looks at you as a free kill, you can outmaneuver them and actually take some shots at them. So this is a nice little plane. Nothing too serious at tier 0.3, but having 12 of these machine guns here is really, really nice. The only downside to this is that, yeah, it does have 4,200 rounds of ammunition here, but it is spread out over 12 guns, so it is going to deplete relatively quickly. Now in arcade, that's not that big of a deal because they are light machine guns. They'll reload faster than, say, cannons, but in realistic, that is something you need to be aware of, just in case, you know, you have too happy of a trigger figure or not that great of a shot. But the Hurricanes, yeah, they're pretty good. There's nothing that really distinguishes this one from the other Hurricanes. You do have little bits and pieces of armor here to protect the pilot from front and behind. Granted, they're not super thick, so other planes with the right amount of belts could be able to go through there. There is nothing to protect the engine or the fuel tanks, though, so I mean, there's that one little armor plate here to defend one fuel tank, but you still have these 3 down here, and just kind of show you how many guns there are in this plane. But the positioning of the fuel tanks does make it nice, though, because instead of having them all in the wings to where basically any shot in the wing is going to get you set on fire, they do have to aim center of mass here. So yeah, the target to set you on fire with the gas tanks is bigger, but it's in one spot versus several smaller spots in the wings that could just as easily kill you. So then moving on to the Spitfire Mark 1A. This is the first Spitfire you get in the tech tree here. They're very similar to the Hurricanes, I would say, in terms of just a gameplay sense. You do maneuver a little bit better, and you're a little bit faster. In terms of your armament, it's still the same as most of the Hurricanes, the 8 7.7s here. Now they are spread out a little bit, which is kind of weird. You figured they'd be like right next to one another, but I'm not an aircraft designer. I don't know where to put guns and wings. To me, if it were up to me, I'd put everything in the nose. But so this is a plane you kind of want to test with your convergence with it as well. In terms of self-protection, you do have you got like one little bit of steel back here with another one, and then the pilot seat here. You don't really have anything in the front besides this piece of bulletproof glass. Spitfires are actually pretty durable just because they do have just kind of one big fuel tank here. So Spitfires, they're okay fast. They're not slow by any stretch of the means, but they can be outrun by a decent amount of planes in this game, especially at this battle ranking. Mostly the Americans. But basically, since you are the second most maneuverable, I would say, class of aircraft in the game, only behind the Zeros, I would say try to turn fight anything that wants to get in a dogfight with you. I wouldn't recommend booming and zooming in either the Hurricanes or the Spitfires, just because they really don't hold that energy that well. You can if you're going up against lower battle ranking targets, or targets that are going to be a lot more slower than you are. But I would save the boom and zoom tactics for the Americans and the Russians at this battle ranking. Then we move on to the C Hurricane Mark 1. There's really no difference between the Hurricane Mark 1L and then the Hurricane Mark 1B here. The only difference here is that this is a naval Hurricane. It has a tow hook down here. So, in realistic, being able to land on carriers is a lot easier. Same armor plating as most of the Hurricanes, same fuel tank configurations. This is just a very low battle ranking Hurricane. This is the lowest battle ranking one in the game. So having a 2.0 battle ranking Hurricane, you can kind of throw this in with a lot of tier 1 British lineups, whether you're doing a pure fighter or you want some sort of you just want like one plane in general. It doesn't have any ordnance or anything, like any bombs or anything, so this thing would just be just pure guns. But it's still 8 of them, so at Battle Ranking 2.0, you'll do okay. Just be careful not to, I'd say, get into dedicated dogfights with people who are booming and zooming you, just because they're going to outrun you. Hurricanes are not that fast, but it's still a fun plane. Then we talk about kind of like, I would say, the first serious plane that the British have in terms of, I guess you could say, heavy fighters, or, you know, however you want to play this thing, and that's the Beaufighter Mark 5-1C, or that might be the Beaufighter Mark 4C. I don't know. I'm not too great with my Roman numerals, but this is in-game. It's designated as a torpedo bomber, which is why it's in the bomber light-up. See, it can equip 1 torpedo. It's, you know, it's a decent torpedo as well. I've had no problem sinking cruisers, basically anything, I would say, cruiser or smaller. But I mainly use this thing as like a heavy fighter because it has 4 20mm Hispanos. Now, granted, you are basically a light bomber with 4 20mm Hispanos. So you're going to kind of be slow, not that great a climb rate, not great a turn, but you are going to be the head-on king at Battle Ranking 3.0 because of these guns here. In terms of armor plating as well, you actually have some bits of armor plating here behind the engine, but like I said, they're only 1mm thick. You do have this nice big piece here to protect your gunner, but your gunner's really nothing to even speak of anyway. He has one 7.7 machine gun, and it's a Vickers, so it's going to be firing kind of slow anyway. If there is anybody on your tail, I would recommend trying to maneuver and get him off of your tail rather than taking control of the gunner, just because this guy isn't going to do much. But you do get a piece of armor here and a big old piece of glass here. Now, these aren't impervious to being shot through, but I would say mostly you're going to win on head-ons just because you do have 4 20mm Hispanos. Now, in terms of the ammunition for the Hispanos, I mostly just rock with either the stealth belts or the universal. Mostly just because with the universal you get a heavy amount of high explosive fragmentation, semi-armor piercing. With this one here, it's basically all just high explosive, and then there's a high explosive fragmentation, along with 1 AP shell, but there is a lot of high explosive in these Hispanos here. But I would mainly use this thing as a heavy fighter. I would try to climb as best I can, because this thing is absolutely devastating at bombers at 3.0 battle ranking. At one point, this thing was called the Broken Fighter. It had a different flight model at the time and was capable of almost dogfighting with most things that it got engaged with. But the way you're going to get your kills in this thing is by either surprise attacking them by booming and zooming, or head-ons. That's basically how you fly this plane. The downside to this big plane, obviously, is it's got big fuel tanks. So there's nothing protecting them from these head-on attacks here, so just be mindful you do have fuel tanks that can be hit while also going head-on. But it's a good torpedo bomber. It's a pretty good heavy fighter. It's overall, I wouldn't say it's a great plane just because it is fairly slow, but if you do get these guns on target, they do wreck. Then we move over to the Sundaland Mark 5. Yay, another Sundaland! The only difference between the rank 1 Sundaland and the rank 2 Sundaland is the addition of 2 50 cal machine guns here, kind of like in the midsection of the aircraft. The other Sunderland here only having the 7.7 turrets. And I think there might be another set of guns. I'm not too sure. Nope, that's it. I thought there was another set of guns under the wings here, which there is. Aha, I was right. So they are only 7.7s, but you do get 4 more guns. You get 2 50 cals here, which this guy controls both, and he can control at the same time. Same with this guy down here. Other than that, it's the same Sunderland that we saw before in rank 1. It just now has some more guns, and it gets bumped up to battle ranking 2.3. Moving on to the Typhoon Mark 1A. The Typhoon is known for being very, very fast, decently maneuverable, and having, again, 12 of these 7.7 machine guns. Now, the best way I can describe this thing at battle ranking 2.7 is like a baby Thunderbolt. You want to play it basically the same way as you would a P-47. Climb as high as you can, obviously while being safe, and then just dive on people. You'll be surprised what these little 7.7s here, even though there are 12 of them, you'd be surprised what is capable of these guns, because they do have a lot of incendiary in those belts. This is also a very decent ground attacker, with the fact of having not only 2 250s, but also 2 500s. You can use these 500s to do some bunker busting if you're fairly accurate with them. You're also very fast, like I said before. So diving down on targets is really going to be your biggest attribute. So just kind of play that plane like a boom and zoom aircraft. In terms of armor, you do have this bit behind the nose here. It is only 3mm thick, but it will protect your engine a little bit. Same with the back here. It's only 1mm thick, but hey, it's better than nothing. The armor plating here, or not armor plating, but the bulletproof glass here for the pilot, and then the back of the pilot's chair here. The biggest downfall to the Typhoon here is the positioning of these fuel tanks. If you go head-on with anything, it will set you on fire, because these fuel tanks are actually in the front of the wings as opposed to being more in the middle here. So be very, very careful of head-on attacks. I would actually recommend not doing that just because of the positioning of your fuel tanks. But other than that, this is a awesome little plane. I think it's very underrated in terms of people flying it out. You don't see these out a lot, because at battle ranking 2.7 there is a lot of other nice things to fly in the British tech tree, but I believe this is something that can very well maintain itself and bring in a decent score. Now, I actually skipped a plane here. This is a plane I actually wanted to talk about the most. It's the Hurricane Mark IV. Now, the Hurricane Mark IV is a designated ground attack variant. The biggest thing that this Hurricane has over the others is the one, it has that little chin filter there. It's also the fact that it has 2 40mm cannons. Now, this is the first time in this series that I'm going to be talking about, you know, these kind of big guns like this. So I'm going to go into a test flight here just to kind of talk to you about how you play with massive guns like this. Now, these 40mm guns do have different types of belts. There is an air targets belt, which is obviously going to be good for taking down air targets. And there's also a armored targets belt, which is better for, obviously, ground targets. So the first thing you're gonna want to notice with this is that it does add a significant amount of drag to the already kind of sluggish performance of the Hurricane. Now you do have one advantage though, is that you're a Hurricane. You can basically turn flame and almost anything and be able to get those guns on target. But because of the sheer size of these guns, it's going to talk about the recoil and the spread. Now, those are the guns there. That's what it's going to look like, but if you watch the plane as I fire the guns, watch how the plane just dips down. You kind of want to fire these guns like a semi-automatic rifle. Just one trigger pull at a time. You can hold down the trigger, but it's going to throw that aim everywhere. See, the spread just goes absolutely everywhere. And I would not recommend using these things fully automatic. I would just one tap of the trigger each time. Now, obviously, you can use the air targets belts on smaller targets, but I would usually recommend going after airborne targets with these guns. Now, you do have two 7.7 machine guns here for backup, but they are only two 7.7s. Now, if you don't want 40mm guns, you actually do have the option to switch them out. But to my knowledge, the Hurricane Mark IV's guns by default are going to have those big 40mm. They are incredibly satisfying when you do hit somebody with them, but you only get 30 rounds. So that's 15 trigger pulls. And they do take a long time to reload. And until then, you only have these little 7.7s here for backup. Now, like I said, if you don't like these 40s, you can go with 8 RP3 rockets, or you can go with 2 250s or 2 500s. Now, I recommend sticking with the 40s because they actually don't add that much drag to it. And it's also incredibly satisfying when you hit somebody with those 40s. So, basically everything that normally applies to a Hurricane, this one has much more armor around the engine. Just because, like I said, this is the dedicated ground attack variant, but, you know, you're not forced to fulfill that ground attack role because... What's up? Sorry about that. Just some real life things. But, so, you do have a little bit more armor plating, but it is fairly thin. It's more to protect you from ground fire, but you can deflect a few bullets here and there. Mostly just, I would say, either British or Japanese planes that are shooting at you. So, you do have big guns, but big guns have big responsibilities. So then, moving on here, you get the Spitfire Mark IIA. This is basically the same thing as the other Spitfire. It just is a little bit more powerful in terms of its engine. It's a little bit faster, a little bit more maneuverable because of that speed, but this is, basically in game sense, these are practically the same aircraft. Because of that power increase, though, there is a little bit more of a battle ranking increase, but feel free to have these in a lineup. This is just as capable an aircraft as this one. The Sea Hurricane Mark 1C, however, at battle ranking 2 with a battle ranking of 4.0, is all down to the armament. The 4 20mm Hispanos here are I think they're a slightly different variant than the ones, yeah, the ones on the Bowfighter are the Mark 1 Hispanos. The ones on the Sea Hurricane Mark 1C are the Mark 2 variants. All the advantages of a Sea Hurricane, except now you are facing off against the P-51 Mustangs. You're facing off against, you know, Yak 3s. You're facing off against things that will chew this thing apart. Now, granted, you can also chew them apart with your maneuverability, but the higher battle ranking you go, the more experienced players you're going to face off against, and really, they're used to shooting at Hurricanes. They've been at the same tier that you are currently at. It's just, granted, you can now take them down just as easily as they can take you down, but they have almost the same armament or something equivalent to that, but they are faster, they climb better, some of them are even more heavily armored. It just watch out. I would actually recommend holding off on flying this one until you get more experience and higher up the battle ranking, because this 4.0 battle ranking, like I said with the Falkwolf over in the German tech tree, newer pilots, as soon as they hop into this thing, are going to have like biplane battle experiences and biplane level knowledge of flight, to where they could basically just turn on anything, which they still can. It's just you're not going to last that long if you just rely on turn fighting alone. Then we move on to the Wellingtons, the new, or not new, but one of the newer ones here. They're not new in terms of the game, but they're new for, say, a new player, because it's the first one you get here, the Wellington Mark 1C. The problem with the Wellingtons is that you're starting to go up the battle ranking, but you still have the same problems that all the low-tier British bombers have, and that's you're slow and you have very weak defensive armament. Now, granted, your turrets here do cover a large area. It's just you only get 2 guns in the middle here as your midsection guns. You only get 2 guns back here and 2 guns back here. Now, unfortunately, most of the targets that show up are going to be coming up to you from behind, and 2 7.7mm machine guns here are not going to do very much. The big thing about these is they do have a very nice bomb loadout, including torpedoes, 500s, a mix of 1000s and 2, or you can just equip one 4,000-pound bomb, which is basically dropping a barrel. If I can pull it up here. Yeah, this giant barrel that sits underneath the aircraft. This is just the one bomb. It is a 4,000-pound bomb, so it's going to hit fairly hard, but it's your only bomb. Sorry, it's just I'm recording in a living room that everyone else lives in. Oh no, you're good. You're good. Oh, it's all right. It's all right. You're good. I'm recording for my YouTube channel that I do. No, it's all right. Like I said, I record in the middle of a living room. It's all right. So then, moving on to the Mark 1C, the only really difference from the first one and the second one is the positioning of two of the guns. They moved it from onset the wing here to kind of in between the wing and the tail here. Same bomb loadout with everything here. I mostly just say just strap on the 4,000 pound bomb. Most likely, in at least arcade, you're only going to get one bomb drop anyway, and in realistic as well before you have to go reload. So just stick the 4,000 pound cookie on here, as it was called, and just have fun. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to the higher ranking ones here at Battle Ranking 3.3, you do get a turret change again. The turrets back here are now a quad turret with 4 of the 7.7mm machine guns, but at Battle Ranking 3.3, a lot of things are going to be able to wreck you. I would actually recommend not flying out the Wellingtons all that much, unless I would say like the 2 here, which is a shame because the Wellingtons have great bomb loadout, have a great bomb loadout choice. It's just they're slow, they can't defend themselves, and really those are the big 2 main points. It's also the giant fuel tanks in all of them. That's why these were in real life were dedicated night bombers. The Americans would bomb during the day, and the British would bomb during the night, which is why they have all these black painted tail and underwings and everything. It's because they were supposed to be flown at night. But in this game, you are not going to be guaranteed a night battle, and if you at least play realistic or arcade, you are going to have a nice big red outline with your name up here, so the advantages of being flown at night completely get thrown out the window. So, unfortunately, in terms of the Wellingtons, I would have to say aren't that great, but they can be fun at times if you are lucky enough to be left alone. Then moving back over to the fighters here, the last of the fighters in the normal tech tree, you move up to Battle Ranking 3.7 from 2.7, and that's because the Spitfire Mark II-B is basically the same as the other Spitfire, except now they changed out 2 of the 7.7mm machine guns and replaced them with 20mm cannons. Now granted, you only get 60 rounds per gun, but at Battle Ranking 3.7, that's going to do a lot for you. All the advantages of the other low-tier Spitfires, it's just now you're at 3.7, but you do have armament to face off against anything at that battle ranking. They are in the wings, however, so you do have to deal with gun convergence. Same armor plating, same thing in the fuel tanks. Same tactics. I would recommend trying to turn fight anything that tries to dive on you, because at Battle Ranking 3.7 especially, I said with 2.7 there's things that are going to be a lot faster at you. At 3.7 there's going to be a lot of things that are faster than you. So just try to get things to turn fight with you. That's your biggest advantage. Then the last bomber here is the Halifax B Mark 3A. Now, the best part about the Halifax is the fact that it can drop several, you get 9,000 pound bombs and then 6 500 pound bombs. If left alone, this thing will absolutely devastate bases. But you have the same problems the Wellingtons have. Granted, you do have a top turret here with an additional 4 7.7 machine guns here that can fire backwards with this one, so you do have more of a chance than the Wellingtons do, because now you have 2 turrets firing at them instead of 1. It's just they're 7.7mm machine guns in turrets. They perform a lot differently than 7.7s that are mounted in wings. So terms of armor plating, you get a chunk here and a chunk here to protect the back of your pilots, and a little bit here and here, but your biggest disadvantage is also going to be the amount of fuel tanks here in the wings. So an absolute dump truck being able to just dump ordnance out onto a base, but if anything starts to climb up towards you, you have a better chance of defending yourself, but not a great chance. Then moving on to the premiums here, you get 2 Australian aircraft, just like the Wearway at Tier 1. The Boomerang Mark 1 and the Boomerang Mark 2. Now you need to buy the Boomerang Mark 1 in order to get the Boomerang Mark 2, but I would just say get both of them, because the best way I can describe them is they're kind of like Hurricanes but with 20mm cannons. Now it is a battle ranking 3.3, but you do have some really nice guns. The 2 Hispanos here and the 4 7.7s here. Now the 4 7.7s do have 4,000 rounds of ammunition in them, so if your cannons do run out of ammo, you can still at least participate in a dogfight. But the best way I could say this is that they are slower Spitfires. This 21.2 second turn time here, it feels like it turns better than that, just from my personal experience. So in terms of armor plating, the 1 bit here and then kind of a dual layered here for the back. You do have 1 massive fuel tank here in the tail and a couple of fuel tanks here in the wings, so this thing does not like getting shot at, especially from the rear. But don't let that discourage you, because these are great little planes. The only difference from the Mark II and the Mark I is that the Mark II is a little bit faster and a little less maneuverable, while the Boomerang Mark I is a little slower but a little bit more maneuverable. The D520 I'll cover when I get to the French. The Avenger I'll cover when I get to the Americans. The Hudson I will also cover when I get to the Americans, and the Corsair I will get to the Americans. But the Hudson and the Corsair are a little bit different than their American counterparts. The Hudson is practically the same as the B-34 in the American tech tree. You just get this ball turret back here that has 7.7s and then a 7.7 down here. Also, it changes out the forward-facing armament to 7.7s instead of 50 cals. And with the Corsair F Mark II, the only real difference between this Corsair and the other American Corsair at battle ranking 2.7 is this one has clipped wings here, so it can fold its wings better when it's on a carrier. It also means it has a slightly increased roll rate, but in terms of the actual performances of both of those planes, I will get to them when I cover the Americans, because they are both American planes. So, Britain at Tier 2. You get some really nice fighters. Really, really nice fighters. Couple of things I would say get a little bit more experience with before you hop into these. You like research them and then kind of go down here to fill out a lineup before I would say hopping into these. I would say fill out a lineup of planes that you're comfortable flying before throwing these in there, because these are going to be more complementing to these than these are going to be complementing to these. The bombers, very nice bomb loadout, just really, really crappy guns to defend yourself with, because, like I said before, 7.7s and turrets perform worse than 7.7s mounted in wings, because because obviously for one reason is that the guns in bombers are more subject to shooting a moving target from a stable platform that cannot be controlled as better as a fighting platform versus a bombing platform. So unfortunately the bombers are kind of iffy in terms to fly, but if you are left alone, you will have a great time. The moment anybody starts to go after you, though, it's going to be run, panic, press giant red button. But other than that, I would say it's actually a decent little lot here. Some really nice premiums here. Granted, I haven't talked about them all that much because they're basically the same planes, just in other tech trees. But you do have some very unique Australian planes here in both of the boomerangs. So guys, I think I'm going to be covering the Americans next because I have a lot of planes here that I need to touch up for the Americans, and also in my Russian video I will cover the P-40 and the P-39. But anyway guys, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.